Logan spent his early years in a spot where the asphalt just quit. His family's mobile home perched at the tail end of a bumpy, single-track lane tucked into a West Virginia ravine, a remote stretch where even satellite navigation threw in the towel well before spotting the mailbox. Out front stretched a downhill scrap of bare earth dotted with weeds. And in the rear, everything simply halted. No barriers, no adjacent lots, no lamps to pierce the gloom. Just an impenetrable barrier of woodland. Sturdy oaks and tall pines crowded together, their limbs interlacing so densely that even during the warmest months, scant sunlight filtered to the soil mere paces beyond the tree line. From his earliest recollections, Logan's mom referred to it as the boundary, implying the forest ahead wasn't mere timberland, but a sheer plunge into another realm altogether. Initially, that tree line served as mere scenery for his boyhood adventures. He'd pedal his bicycle in lazy loops across the yard, hurl stones at targets perched on concrete blocks, and tune into his father's vintage radio amid the shrill chorus of insects baking in the sun. The woods? They were just background, nothing special. Grown-ups cautioned him against venturing too deep, but that was standard around these parts. Folks issued similar warnings about derelict shafts, flooded quarry pits, and corroded vehicles. The valley hoarded hazards like elsewhere hoards correspondence. He first sensed something off about the trees at age 8. It was a sticky evening toward the close of summer. The heavens streaked with violet and amber hues as his folks headed out for their routine Friday evening jobs at the factory and the eatery. His usual babysitter, his older cousin, had phoned to say she was under the weather. Funds were scarce, and his mother's expression mirrored that strain when she eyed the timepiece. Following a brief spat near the kitchen basin, Mom and Dad simultaneously concluded Logan could manage solo until the witching hour. She recited the guidelines like a ritual chant. Secure every entrance. Admit no one. Avoid the cooking range. If fear creeps in, ring Aunt Brenda. He bobbed his head, acting unfazed. But the moment their vehicle's rear lights faded along the gravel path, the quiet transformed. It didn't amplify. It thickened. The typical symphony of amphibians and insects outdoors receded, as though muted by an unseen hand. The wall-mounted timekeeper above the cooler ticked more insistently. The appliance droned and sputtered erratically. The screen's flicker failed to repel the shadows crowding the panes. He was midway through a vintage flick when the noise intruded. Methodical, shuffling treads on the loose stones nearby. No vehicle rumble, no motor hum, just a rhythmic grind of pebbles yielding to pressure, originating from the trailer's woodland-facing flank. Initially, he figured it might be his father returning for a forgotten item. Logan silenced the television and strained to listen. The footfalls ceased. Moments passed, then a faint rasp glided along the exterior paneling. An elongated hush, following the wall's span. He went rigid on the sofa. _quote_0_ he ventured. Silence. A gust, he rationalized. Perhaps a twig. The forest abutted the rear platform directly. It stood to reason a bough could graze the side during a draft. Rising, he edged toward the entryway, proceeding cautiously to catch any clearer sounds. Beyond that flimsy steel barrier, the night appeared to pause in anticipation. The steps resumed. Now, off the stones, onto the timber deck. He detected the planks groaning sequentially, as if a ponderous or deliberate figure traversed the forward veranda, leisurely, purposefully. The glen was hushed enough to pick up distant lorries on the highway or a far-off canine's yelp. This evening, utter stillness. No machinery, no pets, no buzzing bugs. Solely those ponderous, deliberate footfalls. They halted precisely at the spot where the entry lamp's illumination tapered off. Every instinct urged him to peer through the viewer, fling wide the portal, and confirm it was a false alarm. Rather, he heeded his mother's directive. Retreating, he snatched the receiver off the surface and punched in his aunt's digits with fumbling hands. It buzzed endlessly without reply. Out there, amid the hush, something adjusted its stance on the planking. A subtle creak echoed from the wood. He ended the call and remained in the kitchen, his breaths coming in short gasps as he strained to listen. Then, right at the boundary of the porch light's reach, it began to stride slowly from one end of the trailer to the other, only to reverse course. Whatever lurked out there moved with a weighty, purposeful gait, far too deliberate for a wandering mutt, too methodical and unhurried for a mischievous teenager's joke. The activity dragged on endlessly, it seemed. Logan didn't budge until his legs trembled from the tension of immobility. He retreated down the hall, away from the noise, barricading himself inside the cramped bedroom. There he huddled on the mattress, gripping his phone and a baseball bat tightly against his body. Eventually exhaustion claimed him, and he dozed off. Come morning, as his father roused him for school, he recounted the eerie sounds from the night before. His dad stepped out, inspected the porch, and scoured the yard. The gravel path, churned and slick with mud, bore a jumble of smudged prints, old and recent, from relatives, package carriers, and local strays. Nothing stood out as distinct or recent to confirm his tale. With a casual tousle of Logan's hair, his father suggested it was likely an aged raccoon, or perhaps a deer, or even a curious black bear nosing about the garbage. Quote one, he added. For a time, Logan accepted the explanation, or made a real effort to, but the routine persisted. Each Friday evening, when his parents headed out and left him solo, the deliberate tread resumed. It never approached the entrance directly. No attempts to jiggle the knob or claw at the panes. Just that unyielding, languid patrol, halting precisely where the porch lamp's beam dissolved into the tree line. On occasion, summoning his courage, he'd steal a glance through the side window, nudging the drape aside by the barest sliver. His view captured the stairwell's silhouette, the steady shine of the outdoor bulb, and then an impenetrable void. No motion, no presence. Yet his hearing painted another picture. The planks groaned in sync with approaching steps. Pebbles crunched and tumbled underfoot. One time, a deep, lingering sigh drifted in, like some massive form loomed beyond the illumination, exhaling toward him. He began keeping the television running through the night, its murmur soft enough to mask the disturbance. He stuffed quilts along the doorframe to deaden the echoes. The bat stayed within arm's reach during sleep. His fingers curled around its grip. Worn out from their work rotations, his parents had little energy to probe further. They wrote off his anxiety as overactive nerves and fancy. He'd always been prone to jitters, after all. His mom often recalled how he'd once sobbed at the mere outline of a hanger on a hook, but the surrounding forest paid no mind to their skepticism. It simply bided its time. That fall, around age 12, fierce tempests battered the valley. Relentless downpours transformed the dirt lane into a muddy torrent. Tree limbs drooped, heavy with moisture, while the electricity sputtered repeatedly, prompting his mother to prepare a row of candles on the kitchen surface. During the peak of one such onslaught, thunder boomed across the peaks, reverberating like far-off blasts. Jagged bolts ripped through the clouds, momentarily flooding swaths of woodland in stark, silvery bursts. His parents departed at dusk, aiming to cross the ridge before the path became impassable. His mother lingered by the exit a bit longer than normal, the gale wailing through the woods behind the home like a living entity. She instructed him to tune the radio to weather updates, avoid the glass if gusts intensified, and phone them at any hint of trouble. Once they were gone, the valley seemed submerged in the deluge. Sheets of rain hammered the rooftop in an unending din. The trailer quaked with every blast of wind. The electricity cut out briefly twice before giving way completely. Shortly past 10 o'clock, the screen went dark. The fixtures dimmed to nothing, leaving just the weak haze from the porch light battling the tempest and the sporadic strobes of lightning. At first, the downpour's fury overwhelmed all else. Gradually, amid a pause in the rumbling, the steady drone eased, allowing faint intrusions to pierce through. From the trailer's forward section, a recognizable groan cut against the gale. The deck planks. He froze. Breath caught. Another groan followed, then a third, measured and unhurried, with pauses that ruled out random whipping by the breeze. Something prowled outside once more, but the torrent concealed the gravel's rasp, and the chaos veiled all but what the flashes exposed. Pulse racing, he ventured into the shadowed corridor and crept toward the entryway. The front area loomed as an inky void. A dull, watery veil seeped through the narrow pane. He considered retreating, fleeing to his space and smothering himself beneath cushions as he once did in childhood. Yet he pressed on, sidling to the panel beside the door, hands groping for the fabric. Thunder growled overhead as he tweaked the curtain edge, raising it slightly to peer outside. For an instant, rain dominated the view. It poured at an angle from the eaves, splashed across the stairs, and blurred the lawn into a shifting veil of gloom. The porch light flickered faintly, struggling to pierce the downpour. Past the steps, the row of trees loomed like an impenetrable barrier of shadow. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning tore through the clouds. In that fleeting heartbeat, the scene beyond the glass flared into a stark, icy glow, vivid as a snapshot from a camera. It etched a lasting picture in his thoughts, one he'd carry forever. At the fringe of the illuminated area, a figure lingered. It towered high, surpassing his father's height and that of any man he'd encountered. It positioned itself where the timber stairs joined the soil. One foot edged into the pool of light. The remainder vanished into obscurity. Its crown nearly grazed the trailer's low overhang. The outline felt off-kilter. Shoulders excessively wide, arms excessively extended, as though a human form had been distorted. The visible portion of its hide resembled sodden tree bark. Elongated limbs dangled by its flanks, digits stretching almost to its thighs. It wasn't oriented toward the entrance. Instead, it angled laterally, similar to how someone might linger by a pane, inching near to gaze inside. The flash captured it midway through a motion, one palm against the railing pillar, slender digits gripping the timber for support, body inclining forward, skull cocked in the direction of the lounge window, straight toward Logan's position, concealed behind the drape. Despite knowing rationally that no entity could spot him in that split-second illumination, a primal unease gripped him, akin to a kid frozen in hide-and-seek, abruptly aware the hunter had fixed on his shelter all along. The thunder boomed, the brilliance faded, and darkness reclaimed everything. He released the fabric like it scorched, reeling back into the corridor. His breaths escaped in short, uneven gasps. The torrent's din swelled anew, more intense, yet he detected the subtle creak of the deck planks, as if the presence had adjusted after its momentary reveal. He avoided glancing out once more. He secured the bedroom latch, dragged his bureau to block it, and huddled on the mattress, clutching the radio against his torso. The tempest howled for hours, but eventually the patter of droplets receded, and he drifted into a restless, heated slumber, haunted by those spindly digits encircling the support beam. Come morning, with electricity restored and sunlight dissolving the mist, normalcy returned. Streams of water trickled along the driveway's grooves. Fallen limbs dotted the grounds. His dad grumbled over the clutter, over how the earth had eroded beneath the stairs. Logan assisted in redistributing stones, his gaze fixed on the junction of deck and lawn. Muddy indents marked the spot, nearly washed away by the flow but discernible. Signs of substantial pressure at the boundary. The soil compressed into two stretched forms. Far too extended for footwear, too slim for a bear's paws, lacking defined outlines, just mass and span, suggesting the visitor defied any familiar beast. His father noted them briefly, then brushed them off as distorted marks from the deluge and his own treads. He shifted to tales of the ancient shafts higher up the slope, how the terrain buckled under heavy rains, how the slopes sometimes moaned post-deluge. That evening, and on numerous subsequent ones, the footfalls resumed. More deliberate now, sparser, as though the intruder had located its quarry during that lightning-angled inspection. Decades on, as an adult far removed from that valley, locals shared whispers of the entities lurking in the Appalachian shadows. Prospectors lost to the depths, slender sentinels poised just outside the campfire's reach. The peaks, folks claimed what they craved and released the rest. Logan never contested such accounts. He simply recalled the forest barrier at his boyhood residence, the evenings when the amphibians went mute, and the instant the heavens blazed sufficiently for him to discern that the void possessed form. That form had already positioned itself at his life's periphery, eavesdropping on his kin from beyond the glow. Sophie convinced herself the relocation signified progress, an easier existence, purer atmosphere, a new chapter where the turmoil in her thoughts would subside. Upon inking the rental agreement for the retreat in eastern Kentucky, the images portrayed an idyllic nook nestled against a hillside, encircled by sturdy oaks. A modest veranda overlooked a slender dirt lane and a slender stream. The closest settlement lay a 20-minute haul at leisurely pace, while the sole nearby resident crested the hill, which, per the owner, equated to another realm. Such isolation was the appeal. Following a chaotic split from her partner and a career that seemed to crush her spirit day by day, the notion of cutting off from the world felt like pure relief. With remote work as her lifeline, she could build up her funds, stroll beneath actual foliage rather than weaving through urban chaos. City pals deemed it courageous. Her mom labeled it rash. Sophie deemed it essential. That initial week nearly persuaded her she'd made the smart choice. The place was aged yet sturdy, a one-level structure with deep, knotty pine panels and a leaning stone flue that puffed out wisps on chilly dawns. Inside, it carried scents of aged timber, fresh brew, and a lingering trace of long-forgotten tobacco. Cell coverage vanished within its walls, though a stroll to the road's curve and a perch on the level stone near the stream brought a lone signal flickering on. The owner, a senior fellow with watchful gaze, demonstrated the water pump, electrical panel, and worn gas furnace prior to offering a slim grin. "Quote 2, he advised, gripping his truck's handle. "Noises echo up in these parts. Packs of coyotes, hooting birds, ancient trunks whispering secrets. Now and then the valley distorts echoes oddly. But keep in mind, the forest denizens steer clear of you unless you seek them out." She chuckled and vowed to avoid any searching. In the light of day, his words rang true. Rays pierced the canopy in gentle emerald shafts. The stream bubbled across pebbles. She positioned her computer on the modest dining surface and typed away with the rear entrance ajar, allowing aromas of moist foliage and timber haze to drift in. For pauses, she'd hike the slim trail snaking uphill from the dwelling. The route he'd cautioned led to nowhere pleasant beyond the crest. She ventured only a short distance, sufficient to glimpse the rooftop peeking through limbs. Rusty metal and slate amid the foliage, evidence of her newly forged, isolated existence. It was the evenings that began resisting. The initial wrapping she dismissed as the furnace. Nearing midnight, the upland chill had plunged sharply. Curled beneath dual heavy blankets, she exhaled faint mists into the blackness, attuned to the fuel device's clicks and sighs. Hovering on the edge of slumber, a fresh noise intruded. A gentle rap, akin to fingers against an empty panel. Followed by one more, measured and purposeful, intervals of seconds between. Rap, wait, rap. It originated from the partition at the bed's rear, the face toward the sharp incline. Her lids parted, fixed on the void, pulse quickening. It might stem from countless sources: a limb swaying in breeze, a rodent, timber contracting with the cold. She stilled her lungs and tallied. Rap. Now the gaps shortened slightly, enough to suggest purpose. She groped sideways for her device to note the hour, signal absent or not. 2:14 a.m. The screen's faint light shrank the space, knotty pine surfaces pressing nearer. Her digit lingered above her mom's entry briefly. Then she let the gadget fall to the bedside. What could she utter? That the structure creaked oddly? That the wilderness roared excessively? She remained vigilant until first light. ears strained. The raps arrived in brief bursts, unhurried, unpanicked, merely persistent. At daybreak they ceased, supplanted by avian calls and far-off barking. Emerging, the slope rearward appeared untouched. Foliage, slick earth, subtle odor of rotting lumber, no limbs brushing the exterior, no trace of knuckles poised near enough to knock. By the third evening, routine set in. Pre-midnight stretched calm. She prepared meals, streamed shows on her machine, handled messages, savored the brook's murmur. Her thoughts sharpened as they hadn't in ages. She pondered if the debut episode was mere anxiety, imagination fired by unfamiliar terrain. Yet around 2 or 3 a.m., the shelter transformed. Quietude grew ponderous. The furnace's drone faded to mere undertone, and the rapping commenced. Certain evenings from the bed's partition. Others it migrated to the cooking area by the aged pane above the basin. Consistently that cadence, like an outsider probing the material, rapping lightly to gauge response. No drags, no handle shakes, no ponderous steps on the veranda, just the raps, steady as a timekeeper marking hours not her own. On the 6th evening, she broke. The raps prowled the perimeter as if encircling, starting at the sleeping wall, then the rear nook housing storage racks, next the sitting area beside the antique iron burner. Each instance she bolted upright, attended, urged herself to remain prone. Each time it persisted until strain quivered through her frame. "Stop!" she hissed at the shadows, lowering her soles to the icy boards. She snatched the flashlight off the dresser and strode into the living room. Her jaw clenched tight. The sharp beam sliced through the gloom in a stark white wedge, casting twisted silhouettes of furniture and table legs onto the walls. The knocking halted. She positioned herself in the middle of the space, senses razor-sharp, and held her breath. Tap. Now it echoed from the wall by the entrance. She swung the light toward it, bracing for a fissure, a critter, any rational cause. Instead, the forest gazed back at her, unaltered. That's when she noticed the utter stillness beyond the window. No babbling stream, no rustling breeze, no chirping bugs, just the soft whisper of the heater and the throb of blood in her temples. Quote 5. She shouted, cringing at the frail edge in her tone. Silence. The tap resumed, sharper this time, shifted a bit to the left, almost teasing. Part of her itched to yank open the door to confirm it was just the vacant porch and gravel path. But the landlord's wary gaze flashed in her mind, staying her fingers on the handle. Nothing in these woods will bother you unless you invite it. Frozen in the shadows with her pulse hammering her chest, she grasped that he hadn't claimed the woods were empty, merely that they had no interest in her, as long as she didn't pry. She retreated from the door and aimed the beam steadily at the wall until the sounds faded away, tapering off slowly, like an intruder growing bored. Come morning, she headed to town beneath a heavy sky, gripping the wheel hard. The modest diner next to the gas pump buzzed with middle-aged guys in hunting caps and flannel shirts, sipping Joe and picking at pastries. She claimed a stool at the counter, got her meal but barely registered the flavors, and weighed whether to bring up the rental. The server beat her to it, sliding over the bill with a courteous grin. "You the young woman leasing Mr. Harold's cabin up on Mill Branch?" she inquired. Sophie paused, surprised. Yeah, that's me. The woman tilted her head toward the glass, eyeing the dull ribbon of highway winding through the timber. How's it treating you? It's peaceful, Sophie replied. Perhaps overly so after dark? Still getting used to it? A shadow crossed the woman's features, not exactly amusement, more like sympathy. That initial week's the roughest, quote 9. Your mind's still buzzing with city clamor. It takes time to rely on the sounds from those hills. Sophie forced a casual lilt. What if those sounds seemed to rise right from the walls? The din of silverware and quiet chatter momentarily dulled. The server froze mid-pour with the pot. Her gaze sharpened, truly locking onto Sophie's expression. Sounds like what? She pressed. Just knocks, Sophie explained, as if somebody's rapping. Likely the structure shifting. These ridges twist echoes in odd ways. Aged timbers creak. Rodents gnaw. Branches press in. Run a fan overnight. It masks the racket. Underscore, quote, underscore 17, underscore. Certain people belong to the mountains. Others don't. Nothing wrong with figuring out your place. On her final evening in the cabin, the night air hung crisp and biting. Stars pierced the skyline above the ridge, bright to the point of pain. She piled her boxes near the exit, leaving just her bed and a suitcase of garments unpacked. It resembled lingering in a vacant theater scene, braced for the finale. She figured awareness of her exit would simplify things. It didn't. The tapping kicked off precisely as expected, shortly past 2, like the mountain operated by its own clock. This time it felt subdued, almost reluctant. The taps crept gradually across the space, resembling fingertips gliding along a basin's rim. She wedged herself against the headboard, knees drawn close, quilts gripped firmly over her. You can't come with me. I'm going away. Tap. For a breathless instant, it emanated right from behind her as if replying. Her heart surged, faltering. She sensed its thud in her neck, her pulses, the soft hollow at her neck's nape. The wrapping locked into that fresh pattern, steady as breath. When daylight at last seeped a thin glow past the drapes, the sounds ceased. The ensuing hush carried a new quality, not quite easing, more akin to a lull in dialogue than its close. With unsteady limbs, she hauled her boxes to the vehicle, avoiding prolonged stares at the tree line. The woods loomed motionless, uncaring. As she drove away on the dirt path, the cabin shrank in the side mirror, a shadowed box amid stripped limbs, until the valley's bend swallowed it whole. Several months on, in her compact city flat amid horns, alarms, and quarrels seeping through flimsy partitions, Sophie occasionally stirred near 2:14 a.m. Her chest would pound without cause. In the shadows, she'd strain toward the faint drone of the structure, and briefly, she'd catch it once more. Not from the barriers or planks now. Within the gaps of her own pulses, something lingered, hushed and enduring, as though it had synced to her pace even after the peaks released her. Mason was raised in a home that tilted against the hillside, as if aiming to fade from sight. From the porch out front, the entire valley sprawled into view. A narrow stream glinted amid the foliage, a dirt lane snaked toward the settlement, and opposite their spot stretched a broad crest that eclipsed much of the heavens. Deer roamed that crest. That's where his kin headed when the chill deepened and foliage began to drop. His debut trip came at age 15, his nerves so frayed he fumbled his laces. His dad had stalked that crest alongside uncles and relatives for generations, as far back as memory reached. Certain hunts yielded game, others brought just tales of escapes. Regardless, it formed a tradition. On this outing, they joined his father's buddy, Rye, a fixture at their dinner table since Mason's toddler days. Rye's guffaws boomed, his swears roared louder, and he spun yarns of woodland exploits too wild to confirm yet irresistible to swallow. They gathered pre-dawn at the dirt turnout where the disused timber trail climbed the slope. The truck beams illuminated the mist drifting over the stream, transforming it into a wall of opacity. His dad passed him a thermos reeking of coffee and steel, then gripped his shoulder firmly. "Stick close between me and Ray," he instructed. "Don't wander off by yourself. If you lose sight of us, shout loud. Got it? Quote 22. Got it? Quote 23. Ancient strip mine off in that direction. Tumble into it and no one's dragging you back up." He chuckled. But it rang more serious than funny. Mason fixed his gaze on his dad's jacket back and avoided lingering stares into the woods. They arrived at the site right as the mist began to lift. The logging path forked around a bump on the crest, one arm veering left, the other dipping into a gentle dip. They chose to fan out. Ray would head along the left path, tracing a dim animal track along the ridge's edge, peering into the basin. Mason and his dad would hold near the dip, where faded prints and scat wove through the foliage. "We'll position you on that log," his dad said, indicating it. "Spot what might be a deer. Confirm it's not us before your finger even twitches near the trigger. Clear?" He dipped his head. They ran through the safety rundown once more, though he knew it by heart. Muzzle pointed low. Index finger clear of the trigger till firing. Be certain of your target and beyond. Stay put unless necessary. Ray tapped his cap brim and flashed a grin. "Should you catch my shot, it means I bagged the trophy, leaving you both skunked," he quipped. "Or I nailed my boot instead. Regardless, expect my yell." They observed him depart, his vest flickering through the fading fog. Moments later, he blurred into a silhouette. Seconds more, and he vanished entirely, absorbed by the terrain. The forest seemed to tighten around the gap he'd left. They settled in. If you've never experienced solitude in the peaks at dawn, it's tough to capture how piercing the silence can be. Initially, every detail assaults you. Water droplets plinking from branches, limbs creaking in the chill, far-off ravens squawking. Gradually, those noises merge into a steady drone, and you're attuned to the anomaly. A branch cracking under pressure, a hoof scraping rock, the respiration of a large creature. The first hour passed motionless. Mason's feet grew icy inside his boots. His hands prickled where they lay on the gun's grip. His dad perched on a downed trunk some distance back, motionless like the terrain itself, gaze sweeping the incline. Then, from the left where fog lingered dense amid the conifers, a lone rifle shot shattered the stillness. It reverberated sharply against the crest, ricocheting between walls until its origin blurred. Flocks of birds burst from the canopy. His ears buzzed. He glanced at his dad, who'd risen swiftly, hands cupped to his lips. "Ray!" his dad bellowed. You nail it? Echoes alone replied, fading out. They paused another minute. His dad called once more, edge sharpening his tone. Ray, everything okay? Nothing. The mist to the left felt denser now, advancing like a sluggish pale wave through the trees. The atmosphere carried that eerie emptiness just prior to a shift in weather, when noises distort and ranges play tricks. Goosebumps rose on Mason's skin beneath his coat. Hold your ground, his dad decided at last. I'll head up the trail. Try to spot him. Double whistle from me and you join. Anything different, you call out. Don't budge till then. Got it? He nodded once more, mouth parched. His dad vanished along the logging route, his vest vivid briefly before the haze muted it and the forest claimed him. Then solitude enveloped everything. The wilderness expanded vast. Minutes dragged. He adjusted slightly, mindful of silence. His thoughts cycled through every tale of hunts gone wrong he'd absorbed, every cautionary bit about folks hit by mistake for shifting at the wrong instant. He stared down the path till his vision blurred. That shot lingered faintly, like a spectral whisper in the ether. What seemed like 30 minutes dragged on, though it was likely just 5, before the hush started to weigh heavily. The stream down in the valley could have been miles away in a different district. Everyday sounds had faded away. No chirping birds. No rustling squirrels. The breeze itself had died down. It was that oppressive stillness where you'd cough just to break it with your own echo. Ray, Mason whispered. The word dissolved into the mist. Then, motion stirred in the haze. A shadowier form amid the trunks higher up, where the path bent around the hilltop. His pulse spiked. He raised the gun but held off on sighting, eager for a flash of orange. Any hint it was a person. But the figure stayed vague, just a void, a denser smudge of gray on gray, perhaps mist gathering around a boulder or fallen log. He froze, gaze stinging. You catch anything? His dad's voice cut in abruptly from the side and rear. Mason flinched, the weapon twitching in his grip. His father emerged, cap tilted back, brows furrowed. Relax, he murmured. Lower the rifle. What about Ray? Mason pressed. Chest still pounding. His dad gave a single shake of his head. Zip. He'd gone to the path's end and shouted loud enough to rouse the graves. Silence. Ray's post was deserted, his gear missing. No new footprints in the expected spots. Could be he's hauling a buck, quote 35, or climbed even higher, quote 36. He'd holler back if so, his father replied softly. He scanned the slope once more into the denser clouds. We'll head to the vehicle. Signal's better there. This doesn't sit right. That stretch of peak ain't right, one confided to Mason's dad at the pumps, long after. Led my nephew's kin there in '89. Kid returned babbling about branches shifting out of sight. Quit the woods for good. Certain spots won't release you clean. At the house, the vacant seat by the supper spread spoke louder than the guesses. Mason saw his father withdraw further. The fall chase passed without him nearing that crest again. Next season, a local's offer to scout the far flank got a firm no. Deer aplenty in other draws, he said. No call to prod that beast. In later years, after Mason moved away for jobs, returning only for feasts, he'd cruise by the stop and gaze at the tree line. On certain dawns, with the light just so, the vapor still hugged it, same as before. Each faint rifle crack rolling down the slopes in season twisted his gut. His thoughts replayed how the report had ricocheted off the heights, source untraceable. A resolution, a remains, an error. Anything to tag as heartbreaking yet rational would have eased it. But only that echoing void lingered. The rifle rested casually against a tree trunk, while one whole flank of the mountain had lost all his faith. Outsiders might claim it's impossible for someone to simply disappear in forests, trampled by thousands annually. They insist there must be clues, a footprint, a marker, some explanation. From a distance, those ridge lines appear firm, charted, predictable. Yet if you've ever been enveloped in the dense mist of the Appalachians, blind even to your own feet, if you've caught the echo of a gunshot without origin, you grasp a deeper truth. That terrain holds secrets in its folds, abandoned paths erased from maps, gully scars that time never healed, caverns exhaling chill in the heat of summer and warmth amid winter's bite. Certain spots hoard whatever they claim, regardless of how many searchers you dispatch. Officially, Ray's disappearance is merely another unsolved file, a note in the records. But down in the valley, folks now whisper about that slope with a wary edge. They murmur it claimed a soul. They reckon it snatches one every generation or so. And come the crisp dawn of opening hunt, with mist clinging heavy and unyielding to the branches, more than a few hunters have paused on a log, strained against the quiet, and chosen a safer spot to roam. Ava rarely pondered the comings and goings of patrons. At 2 a.m., such was the rhythm of the overnight watch. Tending the sole eatery along a desolate ribbon of highway slicing the peaks, she encountered whatever travelers the asphalt spat out. Haulers rumbling in from distant counties. Shift nurses heading back after endless hours under harsh bulbs. Men in grimy work boots who muttered barely a word and slapped bills on the table before vanishing. The joint huddled in a gentle curve of the pavement, hemmed by a sheer cliff on one side and a wall of shadowy woods on the other. The actual village lay 8 miles behind, where most arrivals originated, a handful of homes, a fuel stop, and a couple of chapels. Past midnight, the diner stood as the lone beacon of illumination for miles around. Viewed from without, it glowed like a warm orb in an ocean of night. From within, the windows formed an invisible barrier splitting realities. At the outset, Ava savored the hush, the faint buzz of the vintage jukebox, the pervasive aroma of scorched brew and sizzling pork, the massive silver percolator wheezing and bubbling as if alive. She recognized the habitués by their footfalls and the manner in which they swung the entrance wide. Tony, the cross-country trucker who dubbed her kiddo regardless of her age. Mrs. Ellis, who claimed her fixed nook and tackled puzzles till her boy wrapped up at the plant and fetched her. The emergency crews drifting in pre-sunup, their features gaunt from the night's grim sights. The newcomer didn't slot into those familiar molds, though he blended in initially. His debut visit fell on a Tuesday evening in the season's early chill. Gale winds howled sharp, and the flanking peaks loomed as ragged silhouettes against a hazy star field. Ava was buffing the countertop when the entry chime rang, ushering a gust of frost. She looked up on instinct, anticipating a familiar face. He entered solo, around 45, perhaps with receding raven locks slicked flat and a scruffy chin that suggested a half-hearted grooming effort. Clad in a simple ebony coat fastened high, denims and footwear remarkably spotless for these parts. Nothing struck her as off-kilter right away. No fidgeting, no vacant stare, no bullying stance. Rather, he moved with deliberation, each gesture calculated. "Pick any spot," Ava offered, snatching a laminated card. He settled into a bench 4 spots from the glass, positioned to monitor the entrance and the space without craning. As she approached to top off his mug, she caught his gaze, washed out, hovering between slate and azure, and noted how it darted beyond her to the mirror image on the rear panel, as though tracking potential arrivals outweighed her presence. "Bitter chill outside," she remarked, the routine icebreaker. "Heading up the highway," he responded evenly. His tone was steady and unremarkable, the sort that evaporates from memory. "Got pie? Apple or chocolate?" "Apple's the winner. I'll trust your pick," he said, offering a mild grin. It passed without incident. He savored his slice leisurely, requested one more cup, dropped bills with a fair gratuity, and slipped back into obscurity. She gave him no further thought until 2 evenings on, when he reappeared at the same hour, same seat, coat sealed tight. Despite the diner's warmth prompting others to peel off outerwear, this round he went for a patty and a brew. He scanned the blacktop via the pane, his attention weaving to the lot's echo and forth, like pursuing a fleeting shadow in glances. On the 5th drop-in, Ava sensed that nagging itch at her nape, the signal that eyes lingered where they ought not. He didn't fixate on her with his gaze. Quite the opposite. He made a point of being courteous, directing his focus to the menu or out the window whenever she approached. Yet, whenever other patrons showed up, particularly solitary drivers, women behind the wheel by themselves, or children dozing in the front seat, his stare tracked them with a subtle, unwavering focus that clashed with his mild chatter. "Do you pull shifts here nightly?" he inquired one evening while she refilled his mug. "Pretty much," she replied. "Someone's got to hold this spot together." He let out a soft laugh, as if her words were wittier than intended. "Folks must roll through here often at this hour." "It varies," she told him. "Storms, big games, accidents on the highway, those bring them in. Other evenings it's a ghost town. And then there are nights when everyone seems to converge for breakfast and bread at once." "Sounds fascinating," he remarked. "You catch a glimpse of the real locals out this way, the ones hidden away from the main paths. People you'd miss entirely if you never left the city limits." "In what way?" "It's in the dirt caked on their vehicles, or how they scan the doorways right away. Those who dwell far off the grid move differently. They're accustomed to staying unseen. You hail from these parts? Grew up along one of those overlooked trails? Plenty of side paths winding through these ridges. Tough to map them all." "That's intentional," she countered. "The residents prefer the seclusion." He cocked his head faintly, perhaps in assent or simply noting it down. It wasn't a single incident that shifted her discomfort into outright dread. Rather, it was the accumulation of small details. How he'd innocuously probe about the night's crowd levels, then pivot to questioning if she ever handled the place solo. Or how he'd mention vehicles that had departed 30 minutes prior, specifying their arrival route and departure turn. One evening, he brought up the woman in the crimson car, as if voicing an internal musing. Does she frequent this stop? Ava creased her brow. She handles the dawn hours. You wouldn't recognize her. Makes her a nearby resident then, close enough for the commute. Actually, no ... quote _ 68 _ Just crashing with her sibling in the settlement temporarily. Quote _ 69 _ good call. Reporting this quote _ 70 _ if he shows up again, don't mention a thing. Just stall him as long as possible and press that emergency button beneath the counter. We'll take care of the rest. Keeping warm out in that blizzard. Got by coffee if you would. And a piece of apple pie if it's available. While she filled his mug, his glance darted to the window, then caught the glassy echo of the nearly deserted lot. She speculated if he was gauging vehicles or mapping escape routes. He didn't appear uneasy. On the contrary, he seemed at ease, like someone relying on his good fortune. Tell me, he continued, mixing in sugar. Do you see many out-of-towners on evenings like this? Or mostly folks from the nearby ridges? Her thumb activated the button. No blare or alert followed. The sole indicator was a faint red light glowing under the cash register. Far off, a dispatch console blinked to life. Ava compelled herself to converse normally, to pour more coffee, to behave as if everything remained unchanged. The road teams have the mountain pass mostly open, she told him. Traffic keeps flowing. He offered a faint smile. Folks always keep going even when it's wiser to hunker down. Excuse us, sir. Would you mind joining us for some questions? Certainly, officer. Quote 83 glad to assist. Quote 84. What in the world was that? Quote 85 coyote. Quote 86. Heard oddities up yonder back in my grandfather's era. Quote before dropping the matter. As winter gripped tight, the plot turned desolate. The grazing land hardened into brittle tan. Darkness fell swiftly and lingered endlessly. Grace and Eli bunked in the compact rear chamber. Twin cots flanked the walls oppositely. A slim pane separated them, facing the prominence. One frigid January evening, when the frost bit like fangs, she stirred to the storm entrance clanging against its housing. At first, she assumed a gale, squinting at the glowing digits on the budget clock. 1:43 a.m. The dwelling lay hushed otherwise. The corridor furnace hummed and ticked softly. Eli's gentle snuffling rose like a faint whistle, but soon she grasped there was no breeze. The leafless limbs visible beyond the glass hung motionless in the subtle stellar glow. Still, the outer door rattled sharply again, like an impact from outside. She froze, scarcely breathing. Up from the heights, the extended wail commenced, nearer now than prior. It ripped into the darkness with an escalating, knotted lament that contorted near its crest into a voiceless entreaty before cutting off abruptly. Footfalls thudded from their parents' room, father's boots echoing solidly down the passage. The canines whimpered, nails scraping as they rearranged beneath the home. Then the entity atop the rise altered its tone. The following utterance wasn't a shriek. Rather, a subdued, elongated bay, oddly monotone, akin to an individual attempting a melody recalled faintly from behind a barrier. Midway, it faltered, cracked, and morphed into another form, a jumbled sequence of sounds that baffled until her hearing discerned a rhythm amid the chaos. It seemed to be uttering a name, Eli. The syllables stretched out unnaturally, stumbling over them as if unaccustomed to shaping words in a human throat, inserting extra vowels in odd places. But after she caught it, the echo refused to fade. That rough stab at her brother's name echoed along the hillside, reverberated across the yard, and seeped beneath the trailer like icy runoff. Eli bolted upright in bed, his eyes wide in the shadowy space. "You catch that?" he murmured. She stayed silent. She couldn't respond. Her mouth went slack and heavy. From the living room, her father's roar erupted louder than ever. "Get off this property!" He directed the shout at whatever lurked up on the slope. Yet it felt pointed at the children as well. An order to freeze, to avoid searching, to simply remain hidden. The front door flew wide. The shotgun propped near the entrance thundered once, slamming her back into the sheets. Then quiet descended, heavier than earlier. No coyotes yipped in reply. No hounds raised an alarm. The furnace's hum grew oppressively loud. A moment later, her father trudged back along the hallway, his complexion ashen, lips pressed thin. "Keep to your beds," he instructed. "Don't utter that name aloud anytime soon, got it?" Quote 91. "Ever notice sounds from up that way?" Quote 92. "Things in these mountains hear sharper than they talk." Quote 93. "Don't reply if they reach out. Stay off the slope unless welcomed. And never let them pick up your name." "How do you prevent it?" Grace pressed. At last, the woman locked eyes with her. "Watch what you yell into the shadows." Long after, in a modest urban flat where car horns droned beyond the window and thin walls separated her from neighbors, Grace found herself pausing before voicing Eli's name once dusk settled, as though the words could somehow journey back via echoes and branches to that sliver of horizon flanked by dark summits. In nightmares, the wail returned distorted and eerie, surging from the valley in a tone nearly human, yet utterly alien, twisting an ordinary name into a grip that wouldn't release. Leo hadn't intended to stumble upon the house. Truth be told, right up to that summer, he'd have insisted the old mine road's terminus held only a corroded barrier, a tangle of brush, and a sheer plunge that town youths challenged one another to lob stones from. It was the kind of forsaken spot elders invoked in cautions. Keep chasing that path, and you'll hit where the blacktop quits and problems begin. The route itself scarred the mountainside, high above his settlement. Once broad for hauling coal rigs, it had since constricted under encroaching brush and young trees thrusting through cracked pavement. From his rear deck, squinting past a pair of aspens, he could spot its faint streak slicing the facing hill, a streak where foliage struggled to recover. He, Tyler, and Ben took to it since options were scarce. Classes had ended. The nearest cinema lay a 40-minute haul with fuel cash and a reliable ride, neither of which they often possessed. Instead, they possessed endless hours, sturdy footwear, and a collective boredom that turned sneaking onto abandoned industrial grounds into a solid weekend plan. They'd gather at Leo's, slip through the rear field, ford the stream via a toppled trunk, and ascend till the landscape below dwindled. High above, the clamor of the town faded into silence, overtaken by the whisper of wind rustling the grass and the faint, far-off clink of some abandoned gear warming under the sunlight. In the beginning, the leveled shelf of the strip mine served simply as a spot to catch their breath. From there, they could gaze out over the landscape, their homes reduced to playthings below, the church spire thrusting skyward amid the treetops, and the primary route gleaming like a silvery thread. They spotted weathered tires partially sunk in the soil, a pile of mangled debris where discarded equipment had been shoved off the edge, and a pool in one of the deeper excavations. Tinted like antifreeze. It was during their third or fourth ascent that the narrow track caught their eye. Barely noticeable, it consisted of two shallow grooves branching from the main ledge and veering into denser new growth, largely overtaken by young trees and thorny underbrush. Leo had trudged by it on prior occasions, registering only tangled foliage. On this visit, however, the late-day glow highlighted an odd angle deeper within, one that didn't resemble any branch or trunk. "Spot that," Tyler murmured, narrowing his eyes. "Likely just more discarded trash," Ben replied. "Or perhaps a hunter's stand. Since when's there a building up here?" Ben wondered aloud. Leo scanned the area, feeling unmoored. He was familiar with this ridge, they all were, every lookout post, every forgotten path. Every nook with a whisper of phone coverage. Not one of them had ever caught wind of a dwelling on the mining flat. "Could be an outdated company shack," Tyler suggested, "but it resembles a rural home. Nothing corporate." "Let's take a peek. We can at least peer inside, ensure no tweakers hold up ready to fire." That spurred Leo onward. If anyone occupied it, they had to find out. They couldn't afford another headache for their valley. The planks sighed beneath their steps, but supported them. The entry, dangling from weakened fittings, creaked in protest as Tyler nudged it aside. A thick, multifaceted odor wafted forth. Grime, mold, and beneath it, hints of aged fat and lingering meals. Beams of light pierced the shattered panes, illuminating swirling particles in the dimness. The entry space was compact and boxy, its planks buckled and its wall covering peeling in ragged sections. A toppled seat balanced precariously on 3 supports in the corner. A porcelain bowl rested on a nearby stand, stuffed with desiccated foliage that had drifted in across the seasons. Beyond a broad, unobstructed archway lay another chamber, dominated by a sturdy oak surface, etched and spacious for a household of 4. 3 dissimilar seats flanked it. Upon the wood rested 3 dishes. Far from spotless, each bore traces of a past supper, a thin residue now faded to parchment tones in irregular rings. Beside one, utensils rusted over in tarnish. A mug remained balanced, marked by a subtle stain from evaporated contents. Notably, these items bore no coating of dust, unlike the faint haze over the rest of the interior. The surface gleamed almost pristine. "Somebody's been around," quote 105, or they bolted in a rush, quote 106. "Back when they closed this route, perhaps," quote 107. "But then where's all the rest?" No garments, no photos, nothing. He was right. Beyond the dining setup and a few shattered seats, the place stood vacant. No drapes, no refuse, no signs of wildlife in the angles or scat on the boards. The upper level, which he inspected swiftly and with mounting discomfort, mirrored it. Empty chambers, ajar portals, coverings shedding like shed hide. They lingered only briefly. The oppressive hush weighed on his senses, turning his own inhalations into an intrusion. Stepping back into the open area, it seemed altered once more, like an unseen presence had edged nearer during their time indoors. "I'll wager there's a tail tied to this spot," Tyler remarked, while they shoved through the young trees toward the primary path. "We ought to inquire locally." They gave it a shot. That night around Leo's dinner table, he raised the topic with his father, recounting the detour lane, the open patch, and the dwelling with its motionless setup. His dad creased his brow, munching deliberately. "Ain't no building on that ridge," he replied. "But we just came from there," Leo pressed. "Beyond the barrier where the route forks near that aged cistern. We hacked straight through the undergrowth. It widens into a field." Yet his father merely shook his head. "I logged that slope for 5 years till they closed it off, tramped every inch of it. No structure exists in that spot. Perhaps you veered wider than you realized onto private land. Regardless, steer clear. That stretch ain't secure. Soil moves, holes collapse. Folks figure the risks vanished when the outfit pulled out. They didn't." "Drop it," his father concluded, voice firm. The following morning at the fuel stop, Leo mentioned it more offhand to elderly Mr. Green, who'd stalked and felled timber in these elevations long before Leo's folks arrived. The fellow's eyes sharpened the instant he heard, dwelling on the spur path. "You didn't enter it, right? Quote, 112. Recall that landslide in 92 up there, the one that wrecked half the route. My kin vowed he'd glimpsed a small cabin tucked in the foliage that very afternoon. Admitted he nearly slipped inside when the pellets began falling. Decided against it. Ever notice those small crosses by the stream? Locals get nostalgic. They litter the place with trash. Leave 'em be, and they'll leave you be. Creek. In terrain like this, water can sweep a person quite a distance. Do you ever ponder those small crosses along the edge? They're for the searchers who showed up." "Searching for what?" "The missing who never returned," he replied. "The sheriff calls it mishaps, claims the path's treacherous, the current swift, anything to ease his conscience. Not every kin accepts that tale. They scour the stream with photos and lanterns. A few plant crosses upon surrender, others as well. One symbolizing optimism, the other harsh truth." He eased his stance, grimacing slightly. "This remote lane served as a smuggling route once," he continued. "Ages back, prior to your era, before so many settled these parts. Illicit cargo passed through that shouldn't have. Narcotics, naturally, but worse besides. Individuals, young women, lads. Skirt the detour around the settlement if anonymity matters. And should someone vanish on a desolate segment with no witnesses? Well, his eyes drifted to the foliage. The hidden flow below. The holler muffles cries. The brook claims whatever falls into it. Authorities file a form and proceed. Chloe's breath caught. Has anybody faced justice for these incidents? A couple of instances, he noted. just sufficient for headlines, nowhere near bridging the divide between vanished lives and official tallies. From then on, the crosses transformed from vague symbols. Each stood as a testament not only to loss, but to desperate hunts, to fingers pressing stakes into the soil amid utter helplessness. She quit strolling the stream at twilight. The fading rays filtering through branches cast the markers as spindly, drooping figures, necks inclined. During stormy evenings, when the rush out drowned passing vehicles, she remained restless in bed, mulling over the unseen motions mere 30 yards from her sleeping quarters. Several months on, a new report surfaced in area coverage. Authorities had detained a suspect in a neighboring district, accused of abduction and human trade. Detectives suspected he'd exploited isolated routes to shuttle captives among hideouts. Video aired of officers excavating beside a weathered pipe, of soiled proof containers hauled from a gully. The graphic displayed behind the reporter featured clustered markers, routes linking them in a lattice. Among them, a path followed the thoroughfare adjacent to Chloe's lane. A cited timeline aligned precisely with one of the recent stakes she'd tallied by the turn. The account now circulated openly, yet it bred no sense of security. Rather, it validated the neighbor's insight. In these ridges' fissures, souls could be seized, transported, and erased without outsiders grasping the mechanics. On her final morning at the lease, while stowing the final crate in her vehicle, she descended to the brook once more. The atmosphere hung thick and verdant. The liquid glided across rocks with its unchanging, apathetic murmur from her arrival day. The stakes flanked the shore, some tilted, others on the verge of collapse, a ragged line of resilient remembrances. She considered yanking the freshest free, inquiring locally to locate its grieving kin, as though an outsider's condolence could suffice. Ultimately, she left it be. It wasn't her place. Returning to the dwelling, she secured the entrance from routine, despite knowing she'd never turn the key again. Easing onto the slim byway, she peered at the water's span in the side mirror. Nothing but a gleam of liquid and tree-lined shadows remained. From that vantage point, the crosses remained out of sight, just as they were to passers-by hurrying along. That detail lingered in her mind well after she relocated to a place with proper sidewalks and illuminated streets. It struck her how simple it could be, when merely cruising past, to assume the roadway stood vacant, the stream harmless, and no profound tragedy had ever crossed that path. The terrain reveals its past only if you step out and traverse it. And even so, it might whisper solely through modest handmade crosses embedded in the damp earth where the stream could glimpse them. Jackson's mom often remarked that their valley held on to memories. Initially, she spoke of it gently, noting how the mist draped itself over the hills each October exactly as it had during her childhood, or how the whippoorwills returned annually to the identical cluster of trees in springtime. But once folks began vanishing, those words sharpened into something sharper. To outsiders zipping by, the valley appeared unremarkable, a mere offshoot from the main highway, a slim band of repaired asphalt that soon crumbled into fissured tarmac, then loose stones. It snaked between a pair of towering sheer hillsides that squeezed the heavens into a slender strip of azure. Mobile homes and modest cabins hugged the level areas beside the stream. Beyond a certain mark, even those thinned out. Foliage encroached. The path concluded at a corroded barrier bearing a faded, "No Trespassing" placard, pocked with bullet holes. That barrier marked the boundary, locals agreed. Elders, outdoorsmen, even youngsters sneaking smokes near the drainage pipe. Beyond lay a trail meant solely for pedestrians. It twisted further into the mountain's crease, skirting abandoned timber clearings and an abandoned quarry so choked with weeds that it escaped notice unless you knew precisely where to peer. Further in, opinions diverged. Some claimed nothing noteworthy awaited, while others insisted there was far too much. Jackson had been raised about half a mile shy of the barrier. His closest companion, Maya, resided just 2 dwellings away. They shared the school bus, scaled identical branches, and, once deemed mature enough for brief unsupervised stretches, poked into every gully and trail within bounds. Anything but the stretch beyond the barrier. Their inaugural vanishing occurred at age 9. Jackson's dad labeled the fellow a wanderer. He'd arrived at the filling station at the valley's entrance 1 week prior, bunked in his pickup's bed in the parking area for several evenings, then shifted his spot to nearer the barrier. He proved courteous enough during stops for coffee and tobacco, soft-spoken under a worn cap, his features etched with perpetual creases from sun exposure. He's only traveling through, quote, 124 highways, snag folks like him now and then, usually sets them free again. Quote, 125. Reckon he wandered off. Quote, 126. In that, you'd have to intend it. The path won't lead you there on its own. Quote, 127. I'll manage. Y'all treat these timberlands like they're enchanted or whatever. He headed up the route in a flash of hunter's vest and aftershave, yakking boisterously into his cell about rustic adventures. Jackson and Maya saw him saunter beyond the barrier without pause, as though the warning applied elsewhere. Dusk came without him. Initially, alarm stayed at bay. Trackers often misjudged the hour. Perhaps he'd bagged a buck and was field dressing it. Perhaps Dale had simply lost his bearings, looping around on a longer route just to embellish the tale. Darkness gathered in the yard. The hillside shifted from bands of amber and earth tones to an unbroken barrier of night. He still hadn't appeared. As night fully descended, the valley came alive. An engine roared to life. Guys in coats snatched up torches and headed for the entrance. Maya's uncle led the way, gripping the shotgun himself now, his features drawn taut. "Remain inside," he instructed the children. "If unfamiliar lights appear, raise the alarm." The young ones didn't obey fully. They crept to the curve, then to the boundary marked by the calls. The rescuers' lights sliced the brush like slender silver edges. Voices bounced from the trunks. "Dale, yell if you catch our words." 2 hours later, Jackson caught a noise etched into his memory forever. It wasn't quite a cry. More like a fractured noise, caught between a whimper and a choke, floating along the path from beyond the old mining scar. Moments afterward, they spotted him slumped in the dirt path, without shoes. His bright vest was torn to pieces, as though he'd clawed through thorns. The gun had vanished. His cell and bag, too. Scratches marred his legs. His hands were caked in soil to the elbows, suggesting he'd hauled himself along instead of striding. "Where'd you go?" Quote 32. I don't remember, he rasped. I headed toward that abandoned slope. The woods felt off. They loaded him into a vehicle and returned home. Beneath the kitchen bulb, his condition seemed graver. Not so much his body, despite the tremors that made him slosh the mug of coffee they handed him. It was the look on his face, as if straining to lock onto an object right ahead, yet failing to sharpen it. Whenever questioned about the ordeal, he repeated the account endlessly. I followed the trail beyond the low spot. I kept the slope to my left side, as instructed. Suddenly, it was like the path twisted in on itself. I'd bet anything I was heading true, but I circled back to that warped pine 3 times. Shapes shifted when I wasn't staring directly. I heard a stream where none runs. Before I knew it, I was flat on the earth. Then there you were. You just got disoriented in the blackness, one uncle suggested. Stuff like that occurs. Dale jerked his head no. It wasn't mere night, it felt twisted. Quote, 38. Optimism, quote, 39. Do you object if we pass through for a check? Quote, 140. A hound picked up a trail from above that veered here. Could be nothing. Just covering bases. Where was it? Near the barrier, leaning on the upright. Is it possible some kid was just pulling a prank? Doesn't strike me as humorous. Assuming that's the case, the hollow tallies its losses. It doesn't claim many. But those it takes, it holds on to forever. Jackson resisted the notion. He preferred a reality unmarred by superstitions. Folks simply err, he countered. Fog rolls in, old scars mislead, maps go outdated. It's not as if the terrain craves souls. Do you suppose those ancient spirits above give a damn whether you tumble or stroll into trouble? Do the open pits seek your consent? The earth doesn't have to hunger to swallow you whole without a second thought. He had no comeback. That autumn, true to his word, he departed. Fresh city, steady employment, cleaner skies. He adapted to nights silent without the brook's rush and highways that stretched level and direct. During return trips, the valley seemed narrower, entrances more confined, branches crowding nearer. One holiday visit, he strolled with Maya to the boundary where asphalt met barrier. The warning sign endured, a fresher version nailed atop the faded inscription, edges crisper. Private property. Keep out. Affixed to the fence, a ribbon of surveyor's orange tape swayed softly in the wind. The sole vivid hue amid the corrosion. Recall when this marked merely the road's terminus? Underscore, underscore, quote underscore, 154, underscore, underscore. There's a treacherous segment along the ledge, he'd declare over his mug, just beyond mile marker 12, where that massive white pine stood till a bolt felled it. Some label it Dead Man's Bend, but that's trite. Every twisty curve here earns that tag. This spot's perilous for subtler reasons. Nobody can pin down the occurrences, only that the highway acts unnaturally. Feel that? It's only the turn, she murmured, her tone fragile in her own ears. They entered the arc. Headlamps swept the barrier, and stone face ahead in narrow, golden shafts. Briefly, it seemed the auto advanced while the illuminated scene resembled a flat canvas. Then a form emerged in the glow. Dead center in their path, where the blacktop slanted subtly toward the abyss. A figure. Maya caught denim, a shadowy coat, one limb raised as if hailing a stop. but the build rang wrong. The limbs stretched excessively, the crown perched too elevated, and the visage, afterward she'd struggled to convey it. In the instant, prior to her cry, she only grasped the void's essence. No distinct gaze, no definable traits for her mind to grasp. Merely an emptiness that deflected her stare despite her efforts to fixate. Nate cursed, jerked the steering sharp to port, veering from the shape toward the inner barrier. Wheels struck scattered stones at the margin. For an instant, the ride hovered. The motor bellowed. Her harness bit into her torso. Then they jarred back to the road. Tail swung erratically. The scenery beyond the glass, smeared into streaks of cliff, metal, and sheared drop, flashed in erratic bursts from their veering lamps. Against odds, he steadied them through it. The vehicle trembled briefly, then aligned and burst out of the final bend, propelled like a projectile from a catapult. Neither spoke a word until the pavement broadened into the gravel turnout, where he yanked them onto the shoulder, tires grinding roughly against the stones. They remained there in the blackness, the motor cooling with soft pops. Their sole illumination, the faint crimson gleam of the taillights reflecting off the sheer cliff wall in the rear. "Did you catch sight of them?" she murmured. His hands clamped the wheel with such force that his knuckles drained of color. "No one was there," he insisted. "Nothing substantial. I have no idea what that was." They climbed out on unsteady feet. Overhead, the heavens brimmed with stars, occasional shooting stars tracing pale, icy trails. It seemed wrong that the cosmos above continued undisturbed, even as the highway they'd just traversed still vibrated with the echo of whatever had crossed their path. They didn't linger. By that point, the meteor shower might as well have been dismissed as hearsay. Descending again, Nate inched around the bend at a pace that would have shamed his typical confidence, his gaze darting from the tarmac to the barrier. The roadway lay empty. No figure, no creature, no scattered wreckage that could pass for anything else. A week afterward, she navigated that segment under broad daylight alongside her mother, simply to convince herself it was real even on a routine day. The sunlight exposed every fissure in the blacktop, every corroded fastener along the railing. It amounted to no more than a treacherous twist on a constricted byway. Yet it was also the spot where a vehicle had been abandoned long ago, keys dangling in the switch, where her uncle had positioned himself behind an overturned timber hauler, puzzled by the absence of additional tire streaks, where she had witnessed something attempting to mimic a human form, yet faltering sufficiently to force their swerve toward a precipice that had already etched too many lives into the town's reluctant ledger. Folks who discuss spectral spots in Appalachia often fixate on crumbling homes, burial grounds, forsaken places of worship. Maya discovered that the gravest tales sometimes adhere not to structures, but to the pathways we build, the slender routes humans etch across the terrain to foster an illusion of secure passage. She still travels that route on occasion. Choices are scarce. Whenever she does, she lowers the radio volume before mile marker 12, senses the faint chill in the atmosphere, and fixes her stare straight down the middle of her path. Regardless of what her side vision might suggest, the valley retains its recollections. The highway that traces its border appears to as well, and as for whether the shape that emerged into their beams that evening stemmed from a surge of nerves and local lore, or from the ridge itself, exhuming a fragment of its past for a fleeting moment, she can't declare. The only certainty is that certain locations narrow the gap between an everyday commute and yet another unsolved disappearance to less than the span of a safety rail.